Heimo and Edna Korth selected a life maxim people would not live to tell the tale: an existence in Alaska's brutal, unforgiving, desolate tract. For over 40 years, they've trusted their competencies, instincts, and each other to survive a number of the cruelest conditions on Earth. But their adventure hasn't been pretty much resilience. It's also been marked by using deep heartbreak. Behind the stunning landscapes and self-sufficient way of life lies a story of inconceivable loss. What tragedy nearly broke them, and why, after the entirety, do they nevertheless refuse to go away the land that has given them a lot, but taken even greater? To clearly apprehend what we're about to uncover, we want to returned to where it all started out. Heimo and Edna Korth are a rare breed, real off-the-grid survivalists dwelling deep in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. It's one of the maximum remote places on Earth, and hardly ever each person lives there. In fact, the Korths are some of the remaining to do at the old manor, relying completely on the land to survive. But Heimo Korth wasn't born into this life. He got here from Appleton, Wisconsin, a town that at the same time as no longer big, become nonetheless manor larger than Fairbanks and Juneau mixed on the time. His dad and mom, Eric and Irene, weren't outdoorsy. Even although his dad had grown up on a farm, he never discovered to seek, entice, or fish. Instead, he labored in a factory, imparting a regular, predictable life. Heimo tried that life too, working in a manufacturing facility lower back in Wisconsin, but it wasn't for him. He had continually felt interested in the wild at the same time as a kid developing up inside the suburbs. While different kids ran in the direction of city, he did the opposite. Just a quick stroll away, there were open fields and woods waiting to be explored. Most of the time he went by myself. Now, not due to the fact he needed to, however, due to the fact nobody else appeared to percentage his love for it. By the time he changed into a youngster, that pull in the direction of the wilderness changed into too strong to disregard. In 1973, at simply 18 years vintage, he prompted for Canada's Northwest Territory, chasing his dream. But this was during the Vietnam War, and an 18-year vintage heading north raised eyebrows. Many assumed he'd turned into dodging the draft, and those weren't exactly welcoming. Still, he'd become determined to carve out an area for himself in the wild. His first activity became as an assistant to a hunting manual. However, the pay becomes so horrific he could slightly afford lease and meals. Eventually, he had no preference but to go back to Wisconsin. But the desert by no means stopped calling him. Then he were given a destroy, an opportunity in Alaska working for a guide who hunted large sport in the Brooks Range. He became 20 years vintage whilst he stepped into the desert for suitable, and he never came lower back. After running with a hunting guide for some time, he were given hooked up with a friend who ran a trapping line in Alaska. This buddy didn't simply deliver him recommendation, he surpassed over components, meals, traps, the complete setup, and flew him out to a far-flung cabin within the middle of nowhere. It changed into just Heimo and the wild. For 3 lengthy months he struggled to educate himself how to trap. He got here close to ravenous. And if that wasn't terrible sufficient, he fell via the ice on the river, losing almost the whole thing he had. With no real way out, he wrote a letter to his antique boss asking for help. To his marvel, his boss dispatched him a test for $500. That turned into just enough to get returned to city and regroup. But something had shifted. The desert had a preserve on him now. He knew this became the type of lifestyles he desired. He spent the relaxation of that first iciness on St. Lawrence Island, a tiny Eskimo village manor out within the Bering Sea, just 90 miles from Siberia. That's where he met Edna, though they didn't start a relationship right away. Now, Edna turned into born on January 25, 1954. As part of the Yupik humans, her native name is Meaty Doan. Growing up within the community meant knowing how to fish, hunt, and live on off the land. Her uncle, Jackson Mokiuk, became a grasp at trapping foxes. He taught her the entirety how to reduce the furs without nagging them and how to attend to them after skinning. By then, Heimo had grown to be like own family. He'd become close with Edna's father Emerson and spent quite a few time with them. Jackson even took him below his wing, displaying him the fine details of trapping and fur guidance. And it didn't take lengthy for Jackson to notice that Heimo had a component for Edna, especially while Jackson jokingly called Edna Heimo's wife. But Heimo wasn't trying to admit anything. Small cities have a manner of creating everything all people's business, and he wasn't approximately to be at the middle of the gossip mill. Heimo saved himself busy, supporting Kunz run the village keep and learning to hunt from the excellent on the town. When spring rolled round, he left for Beaver Creek, a river within the White Mountains near Fairbanks. A pal had a cabin accessible and wished someone to appearance after their dogs for the summer season, so Heimo packed up and headed back into the wild. For the subsequent 2 winters, Heimo was deep inside the Brooks Range, a brutal stretch of mountains wherein survival turned into whatever, however smooth. In Alaska, they name it Hungry U.S. for a motive. There just are not many animals accessible. Trapping changed into rough. Meals changed into scarce, and the bloodless became relentless. With deep snow and freezing temperatures every single day turned into a struggle. He won't have made a fortune, but the one's winters shaped him into a true mountain guy. He proved, truly, that he could most effective continue to exist but thrive in one of the most harsh environments on Earth. After looking a long way and extensive, Heimo sooner or later located what he became looking for, a place along the Colleen River. This river, a smaller offshoot of the Porcupine River, become tucked away deep in Alaska's wilderness. He wanted a spot wherein he may want to entice enough fur to make a residing, but by the time he arrived, maximum of the exceptional trapping grounds across the Yukon Flats had been already claimed by way of other trappers, but his pal Bob had already been trapping there and invited Heimo to enroll in him similarly upriver. So Heimo trekked about 50 miles upstream, not understanding he turned into moving into the very place that would grow to be his domestic for life. 3 years later, he made his way return to Savunga, excited to look Edna again. But the moment he laid eyes on her, it hit him just how lonely he'd been without her all that point. For their first date, they kept it simple but unforgettable. They went fishing for Dolly Varden, took a bike journey, and topped it off with pizza. By the late 70s, Edna made the trip to Heimo's cabin in the mountains. It turned into her first time seeing the region he had built, and she wasted no time pushing him to improve it. She told him he needed to start building an actual home for her, though even she wasn't certain if it turned into the proper move. But once she stated it, she caught to it, so Heimo started working. He had no preference, however, to finish before iciness, so for a strong week he labored like a man possessed. Just because the first snowflakes started out falling, he positioned the ultimate piece in place. Heimo and Edna were given married in 1982, and for most of the 12 months, they'd no running water, no strength, and no connection to the out-of-doors international. Every fall, they hunted and trapped, stocking up enough to survive the long, brutal winters. Now, Edna's life had already seen its percentage of heartbreak before she met Heimo. She were engaged to a Swedish biologist, and collectively, they'd 2 youngsters, Melinda and Merlin, but tragedy struck when her fiancé died in an aircraft crash, leaving her alone to elevate their kids. It turned into a devastating loss, and the burden of single motherhood rested closely on her shoulders. Her subsequent courting failed to convey much comfort both. Her uncle noticed firsthand that the man she dated after wasn't appropriate for her, unfaithful and unreliable. So when Heimo got here into the photograph, her uncle became cautious. He desired to be sure this guy turned into unique, that he would treat Edna proper. In time, Heimo proved himself. He followed Melinda, though she simplest lived with them for part of the year. Most of the time, she stayed with Edna's dad and mom in Savunga, in which she felt maximum at home. Merlin, Edna's son, lived with her parents complete time. In Savunga, it was commonplace for youngsters to be raised by means of grandparents or other relatives, but that didn't make it any less complicated for Edna. Leaving them behind, even for a few months, became painful. But deep down, she understood that her mother and father could deliver her children the stability she could not assure inside the barren region. 4 months after their wedding, Edna and Heimo welcomed their first daughter collectively, and they named her Colleen after the Colleen River. Colleen was like a little wildflower, complete of life and interest. She spent summers choosing blueberries, splashing inside the river with Edna, and riding on Heimo's shoulders. But more than anything, she cherished to discover. She had a dependency of wandering off, so Edna sewed a touch bell onto her coat to maintain song of her. Every nighttime, as the family took their walks along the river, the sound of that tiny bell jingled with each step. She had a fascination with the moon, too. Whenever it appeared in the sky, Heimo could elevate her up so she ought to see it better, and she or he'd point with excitement, calling out, "Moo! Moo!" Then the inconceivable came about. Just 5 days after her second birthday, and that they by no means located her frame. The grief changed into crushing. Friends and own family advised the Korths to depart the bush, to begin over someplace else. However, they could not. This changed into Colleen's home. Her laughter nonetheless echoed within the wind. Her little footprints have been nevertheless within the dirt, leaving might experience like abandoning her reminiscence. That day when they backed to their cabin, Heimo carved a wood pass for her. He cautiously etched her name and the dates of her brief lifestyles into it. That fall, he and Edna carried the cross up a small mountain overlooking the valley and the river. They located it there, a marker in their love and loss. Determined to honor their daughter, they attempted to get the mountain named after her. They petitioned the Board of Geographic Names, however. The reaction became cold. Colleen wasn't taken into consideration historically considerable enough. Even with guide from the governor and a congressman, they were time and again denied. They collected signatures, did the entirety requested of them, but the answer remained the same. After some time, they needed to let it pass.